They say you always remember the sound of the moment your life changes. For Edward Morgan, it wasn't a crash, a scream, or even the echo of loss. It was the soft click of an HR manager's pen. The woman sitting across from him didn't meet his eyes when she said the words, "We're restructuring." Edward sat there, a polite smile stiff on his face. His hands folded neatly on the desk, as if that could stop them from trembling. He heard himself thanking her, because that's what polite men did. 20 years of loyalty, projects, mentorships, late nights, and quiet diligence, and all he could manage to say was, "Thank you for letting me know." He walked back to his small office in silence, past the chatter of younger employees and the hum of coffee machines. The world, it seemed, hadn't noticed that something inside him had just collapsed. The desk looked the same, the framed photo of his daughter at university, the neatly arranged pens, the sticky note reminders. Nothing had changed, and yet everything had. In 30 days, this space would no longer be his. He'd been given 1 month's notice. That night, as he sat at his kitchen table, nursing a lukewarm cup of tea, he stared at the notice letter again. He felt anger bubbling under the surface, but it was the sadness that sat heavy in his chest. He thought of all the birthdays, the office parties, the people who'd become like family. He wasn't sure what hurt more, the loss of his job, or the thought that, in a month, he might simply be forgotten. He picked up a pen to make a list of things to do before leaving. Clear files, finish projects, say goodbye properly. But halfway down the page, his pen hesitated. And he wrote something else. Do one good thing every day. He didn't know why he wrote it. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was the only way he knew how to leave without bitterness. The next morning, the office was buzzing as usual. People scrolled through emails, muttered over spreadsheets, argued quietly over deadlines. Edward moved slowly, greeting everyone with his usual calm warmth. He started small. When the young intern, Mia, dropped her coffee and looked close to tears, he knelt beside her with a smile, helping her clean up. "Don't worry about it," he said gently. "Happens to the best of us." She laughed through her embarrassment, and he noticed the dark circles under her eyes. "You all right?" he asked. She nodded quickly, but her voice trembled. That afternoon, he left a sticky note on her desk. "You're doing great. Don't forget to breathe." The next day, he overheard 2 coworkers whispering in the break room, Dan from IT and Lila from accounting. Lila's voice cracked as she spoke about overdue rent, the second job she was picking up, the exhaustion she couldn't shake. Edward passed by quietly, pretending not to have heard, but later, he slipped a small envelope into her drawer with a simple message from someone who's been there. Inside, enough to cover her rent. She never found out who it was, but he noticed the way her laughter returned the next week. Lighter, freer. By the end of the first week, something in Edward shifted. The bitterness was still there, but it began to lose its grip. Each act of kindness chipped away at the weight in his chest. He started to see people differently, not as co-workers, but as stories in progress, each fighting battles unseen. The second week, he fixed the office coffee machine that had been broken for months. He stayed after hours, tinkering quietly until the machine hissed back to life. The next morning, the aroma of fresh coffee filled the break room, and everyone cheered. He didn't say a word, just smiled from his desk as the chatter lifted. That same day, he noticed Paul, the team's loudest cynic, sitting alone at lunch. Edward joined him without invitation. Paul glanced up, surprised, but said nothing. They ate in silence until Paul finally spoke. "You know they're replacing you with 2 people, right?" Edward nodded. "Then I guess I must have been doing something right," he said softly. For the first time in years, Paul laughed. Day by day, his acts grew quieter but deeper. He stayed late to finish someone's report so they could attend their kid's school play. He slipped inspirational quotes on sticky notes around the office. He brought in homemade muffins on Mondays. At first, people joked about it, but soon they began leaving small gestures of their own: an extra coffee, a kind word, a helping hand. It spread without anyone realizing it. By the third week, Edward began noticing a change in the air. Conversations grew warmer. Laughter came easier. Even the manager who'd delivered the layoff news stopped by his desk one morning, awkwardly offering, "I heard you've been, doing good things around here." Edward smiled. "Just making sure I leave the place better than I found it." Still, beneath the calm, he carried his own struggle quietly. The uncertainty of what came next kept him awake some nights. His savings were modest. His daughter lived far away, and the thought of starting over at his age was daunting. But when he saw the joy ripple through the people around him, it reminded him that maybe his worth wasn't tied to a job title. Maybe it was in what he left behind. One Thursday afternoon, he found himself in the storage room, organizing old files, when he stumbled upon a dusty cardboard box, labeled 1999 Office Memories. Inside were faded photos from company picnics, birthdays, and holiday parties, faces, young and bright, some no longer there. He smiled, sadly. So much had changed, yet the heart of it, people, caring, laughing, belonging, was still what made it all worth it. That night, he stayed behind long after everyone had left. He took one of the old photos and pinned it on the bulletin board near the break room with a note that read, "Don't forget we're more than our deadlines." The next morning, there was a line of people waiting for coffee, talking and laughing louder than usual. Someone had added their own note beside his. "We should bring back those office picnics." Another added, "Friday lunch potluck." The board became a living wall of small, handwritten promises. Edward stood at his desk, watching the energy shift around him. It wasn't grand or loud. It was subtle, human, real. For the first time since his notice, he felt at peace. When Friday came, his manager announced that the company would start hosting monthly team days again. The room erupted in cheers. Edward sat back in his chair, smiling faintly. He didn't need credit. He just needed to know he'd made a difference. As the day wound down, Mia, the intern, approached him shyly. "Mr. Morgan," she said, "I just wanted to thank you for everything. I didn't think anyone noticed me here, but you did. You made this place feel ... kind." Her eyes glistened. He felt his throat tighten. "You're going to do great things, Mia," he said quietly. "Just promise me you'll do for others what someone once did for you." That night, as he turned off his office light, he looked out across the open floor, the gentle glow of computer screens, the faint laughter in the distance, the hum of connection, and he realized something profound. This was no longer just a job ending. It was a chapter closing beautifully, and the next one was waiting. By the time the last week arrived, the office felt almost unrecognizable. There was laughter during lunch breaks again, soft music played in the mornings, and someone had started leaving small candies on everyone's desks. Edward noticed that the energy, once sharp and cold, had softened into something almost comforting. People greeted each other now, lingered in conversation, helped one another without being asked. And though no one said it out loud, everyone knew where it had started. On Monday, he arrived earlier than usual, standing by the window with his coffee as the city stretched awake. The rising sun hit the glass towers across the street, painting them gold. He felt a strange mix of peace and ache. 1 week left. He wasn't afraid anymore, not really, just wistful. He'd spent 20 years here, but it was the last 20 days that truly mattered. Later that morning, the HR manager called him into her office again. She was polite, professional, trying too hard to sound cheerful. "I just wanted to thank you, Edward," she said. "The atmosphere around here has been, well, noticeably better. People seem happier." She smiled thinly. "I suppose we have you to thank for that." Edward nodded, his voice steady. "It's not me, it's them. I just reminded them of what they already had." When he returned to his desk, he found a small plant sitting there with a note tied around the stem. "For the man who made this place bloom again." He traced the words with his thumb, smiling quietly. He didn't know who had left it, but it didn't matter. The gesture was enough. By Wednesday, he began noticing how the world outside his job seemed to call to him more. He took longer walks home, paused to watch the sunset, even stopped by the bakery where he used to buy muffins for the team. The young baker recognized him immediately and said, "You're the guy who always bought a dozen and said they were for a tired bunch who needed sweetness. Haven't seen you in a while." Edward chuckled. "Still true," he said. "Always will be." That night, he couldn't sleep. He sat by the window with a pen and a notepad, the city lights flickering like small hopes in the distance. He began to write not letters, not goodbye notes, but reflections. Things he wished someone had told him when he was younger, lessons learned too late, reminders that kindness never really goes unnoticed. Each page ended with the same words: "Do one good thing today for someone else." The next morning, he photocopied those notes and slipped them anonymously into drawers, under keyboards, inside notebooks, and between files. Tiny seeds left to grow in quiet places. But even as warmth filled his days, tension brewed beneath the surface. The company had been pushing everyone harder, deadlines closing in, new hires shadowing his team like silent reminders of his replacement. On Thursday, the pressure snapped. Paul, the same cynical coworker who had laughed with him weeks ago, was berated in front of everyone by a supervisor for a minor mistake. The room fell silent. Paul's face turned red, eyes wide with humiliation. Edward rose from his chair. "That's enough," he said, voice calm but firm. The supervisor froze, startled. "He made a mistake. We all do. Maybe talk to him privately next time." The room stayed quiet. The supervisor muttered something under his breath and walked away, but everyone knew they'd just witnessed something shift. Paul looked at Edward with a mixture of gratitude and disbelief. Later that day, he stopped by Edward's desk. "You didn't have to do that," he said softly. "But you did." Edward smiled. "You'd have done the same for me." Paul shook his head. "Not before you got here, I wouldn't have." That night, the office felt different, alive with unspoken unity. People lingered after hours, sharing stories, laughter echoing in corners where silence used to reign. Edward sat quietly at his desk, taking it all in. The noise wasn't chaos anymore, it was community. Friday came too soon. His final day. When he arrived, his desk was already surrounded by small gifts, handwritten notes, a mug that said "World's Quietest Hero," and a framed photo someone had taken of the whole team during last week's potluck. There was no formal farewell, no staged goodbye, just warmth, gratitude, and the kind of eye contact that said everything words couldn't. At noon, the manager called everyone together. "I won't make a speech," Edward began, smiling gently. "I just want to say thank you for reminding me what work can feel like when people care." His voice wavered slightly, but he steadied it. "We spend so much of our lives here, in these rooms, under these lights. Don't let the deadlines make you forget the people sitting beside you. They matter more than any report ever will." A hush settled over the crowd. He placed his hand on the small plant someone had given him. I used to think I was leaving a job. Now I realize I'm leaving something better, a family. When the applause faded, people hugged him one by one. Some whispered thank yous. Others just smiled through teary eyes. Mia, the intern, gave him a folded piece of paper. For when you forget how much you changed things, she said. Inside, written in her neat handwriting, were dozens of signatures, each with a short note. You reminded me to be kind. You helped me believe in people again. You made this place feel human. He couldn't speak. He just nodded, eyes wet, throat tight. By the time the clock neared 5, most people had gone home. Edward stayed behind, packing the last of his belongings into a small box. He looked around one final time, the desk where he'd spent countless hours, the wall now covered in colorful sticky notes, the bulletin board overflowing with ideas and memories. He felt a calm satisfaction, knowing that this place would keep breathing kindness long after he left. He turned off the light and walked slowly toward the elevator. The doors opened, reflecting his tired but content face. As they closed, he caught one last glimpse of the break room. On the fridge was a new note, written in someone else's handwriting this time. Do one good thing today for someone else. He smiled. Outside, the air was cool, the evening alive with sound. He set his box down on a bench and watched as people hurried past, each lost in their own world. He thought of how easy it was to move through life without really seeing anyone. Then he thought of what the past month had taught him, that a single kind act could ripple through an entire world of strangers. He reached into his box and pulled out one of the leftover notes. On the back, he wrote a final message and tucked it under the bench before walking away. The paper fluttered slightly in the wind, the words barely visible in the fading light. Kindness is never wasted, it always finds its way back. As he disappeared down the street, the camera would linger on that bench, the note waiting to be found. The world continuing subtly changed because one man chose to leave differently than he was treated. And as the whisper fades, the question lingers softly in the air. If you had 1 month left in your workplace, what good thing would you do tomorrow?